Hello everybody! Not long ago I featured in my playlist of cool cars for young people the original Skoda Fabia vRS with its 1.9 litre diesel PD130 engine. I know a lot of people consider Volkswagen AG to be an incredibly safe company that only does good, solid, reasonable engineering and never anything particularly exciting. But you only need to look at some of the engines they've put into cars to realise nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, let's be honest here, they are pretty much the only company still making a mid-engined entry-level supercar with a naturally aspirated engine. You've got both a V10 and a V12 from Audi and Lamborghini. You've also got the mighty W16 quad turbo in the Bugatti Veyron and Chiron. But there have also been a number of other cars at more accessible price points with somewhat exotic engine configurations. The VR6 in the Golf R32 and others. The VR5, yes, true, real thing, look it up. The W8 in the Passat, and if someone's got one of those, please, I want to go. VW don't even have one, and that's a shame. The W12 in the Phaeton, the V12 diesel in the Q7, there are loads. And then there is this, the Skoda Fabia vRS, which has up front a 1.4 litre twin-charged petrol engine. That means it is both turbo and supercharged. Yep. This belongs to channel fan Richard, who's currently using it as a daily driver in place of his M2, which he's now sold. And in fact, this car he inherited from his father-in-law. Yep, this car was being driven around by an 85-year-old. And it's a great shame that unfortunately he passed away, because he sounds like the kind of man I'd love to share a pint with. And apparently he really did drive it. This car has not had the easiest life. It's certainly done the miles, just over 82,000. But you can pick these up for a very, very affordable price. What do I mean by that? Well, the old Skoda Fabia vRS you get for about £2,500 if you could find a good one. These start at only £3,500 for a much newer car with more power, about 180 horses, and a much nicer interior. It's still not exactly upmarket in here, but it is markedly more modern than the old car. You even have a 7-speed DSG gearbox. So why is it that these are quite so affordable? Well, one simple reason really, that engine. Clever it may be, reliable it is not. This is what was known as the CAVE engine, the C-A-V-E. There was another, the C-T-H-E, and there was another because this one was famed for two things. First off, being almost impossible to tune when it came out because it is so complicated, and secondly, being extraordinarily unreliable. This is already on its second engine. It got a replacement at only 15,000 miles. The engine also went in the very similar Mark V Polo GTI. And I've got to say, I am an admirer of this kind of wacky engineering. But is there enough good about this car to make it worth taking the risk? In truth, many of these now have probably been sorted, and if anything, you want to seek out a higher mileage example because it's much more likely to have had either a replacement, an upgrade, a fix, or just be fairly solid. From a practical standpoint, it does very well. The car has plenty of space in it. It feels a little bit roomier than the old Fabia. There's actually a surprising amount of storage in the boot too. This exists really in the sort of super mini class, and I would say it feels usefully bigger than the old R56 Mini. I will soon be trying, at very long last, the F56, the third generation Mini. Believe it or not, I've managed to get all this way in life without actually ever having driven one. So I'm very keen to see how that compares. That is a much larger car than its forebears as well. But the Skoda feels sort of reassuringly vague in many ways. We have a light out, that's about the only fault. No check engine light in this one. The AC hopefully does work because it's actually quite warm in here. Weather's been all over the shop recently. It was raining this morning, then it's sunny, and then it rained, and now it's sunny again. Suspension is quite comfortable. It is fixed, it's not adaptive. The DSG gearbox is one of their earlier units, but it's a 7-speed, not a 6. And it's very nice. It shifts smoothly. I haven't put it into manual mode yet, but I get onto one of my favourite roads, and we will do that, see how she fares. Fuel economy, I am pleased to report, is actually excellent. This car, over the last 115 miles, admittedly fairly easy ones, has done 46.3 to the gallon. For a very peppy little petrol engine, that's good. The engine certainly does have quite a bit of pull from low down, and now's maybe a good a time as any to explain a little bit more about how that engine works. It has, as mentioned, both turbo and supercharger, and they're not really designed to work in parallel. The idea is that this engine was a replacement for a 2-litre naturally aspirated unit. To make up for the torque loss, you'd have the supercharger spinning at low RPM, then by about 3,500 revs, it would disengage using a clutch, and the turbo would take over once it's up to speed. The idea being you get the low-end punch of a supercharger, you get the high-end fireworks of a turbo without any of the associated lag. The interior is largely nasty cheap plastic still, but like I said, a step up over the old car. At this price point though, you're not going to find many complaints from me about it, because ultimately the important bits are all right. Gear lever is where you want it to be, not that you're really going to ever have to use it for much. The steering wheel, very nice in the hand, quite solid, nice leather, and it seems to have worn its years very well. And the indicator stalks are all pretty solid, standard VAG really. You don't have climate control, you've just got basic AC up here. You have a media system, which once upon a time you could plug an iPod into and has now been upgraded with some Bluetooth stuff. I'm not going to try the speakers because I really don't want to. What I do want to do is give the car some welly. And finally, we are here at my favourite road. This is a great car to whom. The engine actually works pretty well. Now, it's not exactly explosive, it does still have only about 184 pound-foot of torque, and it's pulling roughly 1.2 tons. That means it doesn't fire you down the road, but it's still more than quick enough. Particularly if you are a young petrol head, this is going to feel plenty fast. In terms of responsiveness, it doesn't really work that well, this engine, because there's still lag no matter which bit of the rev range you are at, so that clearly didn't work. But the chassis is quite playful. The steering also really wriggles and moves around in your hand like you wouldn't expect it to. The odd thing is that you then hope for a car like this that it would mean it also responds to your inputs fairly keenly, and that's not always the case. It feels like the feedback coming through is much stronger than the inputs you're putting into it. Very odd that, but it's actually really quite enjoyable. Means you can tell what the car is doing. It's really nicely sized. Bit of an odd style thing though, this, isn't it? It looks a bit Nissan Cube-y to me, but I like it. It's funky, you're not going to mistake it for a VW. And yeah, it carries some pace, you know. It's comfortable too. Damping works really well. Visibility, excellent. I can see out nicely. These seats are great, really supportive. They hug you just about enough so that you don't move around in the seat a lot, but they're comfortable. Gearbox responds quite well. It's over the more difficult potholes and things that you do find some issues with it. There is a bit of a wobble in this car. That will need investigating. How are the brakes? They're okay. Not very feelsome, but they're also not over-servoed, which is nice. You do find yourself using quite a bit in the mid-range with this car. And I've got to say, the handover from supercharger to turbocharger is at least handled very nicely. There's no detectable sort of uplift or drop in power. It works really well. So there is torque low down. It will give you that. It's really punchy. This gearbox actually works quite well. I've recently been driving the brand new Volvo V60 Polestar engineered, and this gearbox is much better. Far more responsive to your inputs. Still smooth though. It's fun, this car. I mean, really properly fun. All right, turning circle test. How does she do? It's good. It's good, not great. 3-point turn, yeah, nice and easy. We've got parking sensors at the back, I think. It's worth pointing out that with this generation of vRS, I believe the DSG was the only gearbox option available. There is a sport automatic mode as well. You shift the lever down another notch and it'll do that, but for me, you either want it in drive or just do it yourself. it can be a little indecisive in drive. It seems very keen to change down a gear, even with only modest throttle input. I would say perhaps with the handling, one issue I have is that although it's fun and does give you some feedback through the wheel, you don't really have much of a sense of how close to this car's limits you are, which means for the potential young driver, it is probably quite easy to get this wrong, because I feel like it's a car that's not going to give you a lot of warning. Okay, so when you're absolutely gunning it, you do get just a little bit of the old torque steer, but for general use, it's not an issue. It still kicks down if you put your foot too far down, even in manual mode. Now, I wish it wouldn't do that. Yep, even in sporty mode, it'll still do it. That's annoying. This is a great 60-mile-an-hour car as well. You do kind of the speed limit down a road like this, you have a good time. Simple as that. It is the reputation of this car for going bang, which has kept prices low. And it joins the Mazda RX-8 in being a car which probably should be a lot more expensive than it is. However, unlike the RX-8, when this works, it isn't actually that ruinous to keep going. Now, this particular car they've called Trigger's Broom because it has had a lot of things replaced. That might be more to do with the previous owner, though, than the model in general. Good news is that there are lots and lots of VAG bits on it, so generally speaking, it's not too expensive to fix things, apart from maybe the engine. Early DSG gearboxes, I know, did have some issues, but I'm not sure if by the time this came along, they had fixed those. So do your research before purchasing, check some buyer's guides, and just make sure you're happy with whatever you get. But one of these for £3,500–4,000 for a young driver, this is a brilliant first hot hatch. It's wonderful. Not quite as comfortable as the first generation car or as frugal, but does feel a noticeable step up in performance, interior quality, and just the general experience. If you have the old Skoda Fabia vRS, I would say this definitely feels like an upgrade. So a huge thank you to Richard for coming out, because he has travelled a long way to get to me. Don't forget to like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.